Yippee-ki-yay, mother huggers, we got ourselves a brand new Watchtower fresh off of the press, and it's talking about some recent new light, and it's always fun to see when something is announced to Jehovah's Witnesses via a governing body update, and then that gets sort of canonized in the official doctrine when it's in the pages of a Watchtower. So we get to check some of that out today about how Jehovah's Witnesses deal with situations of toasting and clinking glasses together. But quickly, just because I got you guys all sitting around here, the old digital campfire here, so let Uncle Wally sit you down and tell a little story from when I was a Jehovah's Witness, because a good friend of mine was summoned for jury duty, and this reminded me of when I was a Jehovah's Witness and I was summoned for jury duty, and I think it's kind of a funny story, so I thought I'd tell it. So I got summoned for jury duty, and I was like, oh, I don't want to do this. This is annoying. Are we even allowed to do this? What's going on here? So I went to my dad, and my dad looks at me, and he's very proud, and he puts his hand on my shoulder, like, listen here, sport. Let me tell you how to get out of this here jury duty. And so he shows me this letter that he has, and he says it's worked for him every single time. Small business owner, financial hardship, my religious duties, blah, blah, blah. He says, send that in, you'll be good to go. So I was like, oh, I love simple solutions to problems, so boy howdy hey, let's let it rip. So I copy and pasted his letter, and his advice was excremental. Like, when I try not to swear, that I come up with words. I like that one. Excremental advice is what I received, because the courthouse looked at my letter and said, come on down, Buster. We don't really care about the excuses you gave. And this Buster went on down to the courthouse and became, juror number 39. And I was sitting there in that clammy room with a bunch of sweaty mouth breathers who I'm not entirely sure if they shower every 24 hours. It was the most miserable morning, bled into the afternoon. They gave me like $5, like you can buy lunch for $5 anywhere. And I was like, okay, just please don't get called on and for like an actual trial. And it's nearing the end of the day, and I think I'm finally out of the weeds. And then they call old juror number 39. So I go in there, and they're doing the interview process where each lawyer can deselect. They can remove some of the people on the panel, on the jury there, so they can get like the composition of it that they're very comfortable with. And they weren't asking me any questions because I had a plan going into it. And there were only two spots left, or two people left to be removed, and I was one of them, and they hadn't asked me any questions. And I was really freaking out because from the context clues I was able to gather, this was a pretty serious, significant case involving a minor and loss of life. And ex post facto came to find out, I think it went on for 20-something days. So it would have been a real nightmare situation for me. But I had my plan, and they finally called on juror number 39, and baby jury 39 didn't disappoint. I went on a red-faced, frothing out the mouth rant about Armageddon. I was in the flow state. I was talking about religious and God and Satan and the demons defiling the beautiful temple, and I don't even know what I was saying. I was basically reading from the book of Daniel, and everyone would have just looked at me and just thought, well, we thought this guy looked pretty normal, but wow, what a psycho. Let's get him out of there. And they said, yeah, we're going to have to remove juror number 39, and juror number 39 went home. Anyway, that was the time when I was called for jury duty, and when my friend got called for jury duty, it just reminded me of that story. Has nothing really to do with this video. It's not like a foreshadowing or anything like that, but just wanted to at least talk about that. Maybe the real reason is that whatever works for one generation of Jehovah's Witnesses, like my dad, doesn't always work for the next generation. He had a method of getting out of jury duty that worked for him, and then he tried to pass that on to me. But every so often, despite, God never changing or whatever, sometimes you have to make some modifications. Sometimes you need some new light in order to clarify things. At least that's the lesson I'm going to pretend we'll take away from it. Hello and welcome Welcome back to the JW Thoughts channel. My name is Wally, and today we're taking a look at the November 2026 Watchtower. Quickly before we get into it, don't forget to drop a like on the video. It genuinely helps it get out to more people on YouTube. It's very much appreciated by me. Helps the cause, helps the community, I think, hopefully, and all of that good stuff. So yeah, drop a like if you like it, hype if you're hype about it, all of that good stuff. Anyway, let's jump right into this bad boy. And we'll start with the very first article. To please Jehovah, keep training your con science. Wait, I think I did that joke before where I only said con science the entire video and I never explained that it was a joke. That was kind of funny. We won't do that again, and we won't repeat the same jokes. Anyway, so this is talking about the conscious, and they compare it to a smoke detector. They show some guy in a kitchen, he's destroying his kitchen, or his turkey at least, and he says our conscience can work like a smoke detector, but far better.
Here's what Jehovah's promising. As Jehovah's enemies, they're going to vanish like smoke.
Not really too much said there. I did think this was interesting here in paragraph 4, though, when it said to illustrate, imagine the following scenario. A young brother moves to a new area. Naturally, he wants to make friends. There are some young people his age in the congregation. They invite him to a gathering, and he gladly accepts. He notices, though, that a few who are there have little respect for Jehovah's standards regarding morals and the use of alcohol. Will he pursue a friendship with those troubled youths? Of course not. His conscience has sounded the alarm, and he will heed the warning. Those early warnings from his conscience will protect him from going down a road that might lead to serious sin. Now, I found it fascinating that they would use this as an example, because age restriction when it comes to alcohol and consumption is localized. It is not global. Here in the States, it's 21 years old, and even within that construct, different specific states can have different laws with, well, what is actually criminal? Is it the purchasing? Is it the possession? Or is it the consumption of it? And those can vary, by your various regions. So when they're using this as an example, I just find it interesting, because it's like, okay, you move to a new area, and, oh man, now people are over here drinking. But you could have the same group of Jehovah's Witnesses, in a private setting that are consuming alcohol in, let's say, Ireland, right? And they are all 18, 17, it's Ireland. They're like 14 years old, but they're like, 18 years old for Jehovah's Witnesses. And then that group goes and travels outside of the U.S., and they're are not supposed to drink because it would offend. It gets really messy when you really break it down. So I think it's fascinating that they use this as their example, because what they're essentially saying is, how willing are you to obey Satan's worldly, artificial, arbitrary rules? I feel like something that is more sensible would be like, well, why don't the Jehovah's Witnesses just set their own standard and have their own rule and then abide by that? And it would be a lot cleaner across the board. Not trying to give the governing body any ideas or anything, but just curious why that hasn't come about. But, anyway, I'm not a governing body member, so I don't get to make the rules. All right, now let's jump right into the main attraction here, and that is going to be this picture. Put it on the old green screen here for now, just so you can keep it in the back of your mind, but we will pick up at paragraph 7 and get back to that later. As was the case with Adam and Eve, in some aspects of life, Jehovah tells us specifically what is right and what is wrong. In other areas, there is no precise Bible law that tells us what to do, so we need to keep perceiving what the will of Jehovah is. The choices we make will either please or displease Jehovah. I just want to I highlighted it in red for myself, but I just really want to get it through to people. They are saying here in 2026, the decisions that you make are going to either make God happy or sad. There's not a spectrum here. There's not a tolerance. There's not what works for some, what works for... No. Your decisions will either make God happy or will make God sad. Keep that in your mind. Our conscience can help us to perceive what Jehovah's will is and act in harmony with that. How can we make decisions when a situation is not covered by a specific Bible law? In such a case, Christians must use their Bible-trained conscience. Often there are many factors to consider when deciding what to do, such as our motives, our intentions, and the local culture. Two Christians who are in a similar situation may make different decisions. Yet, if their choices are in harmony with Bible principles, both individuals can act with a clean conscience and please Jehovah. Consider the following situation. Two mature Christians, each attending a separate work-related event, are invited by their respective employers to raise or clink their glasses at dinner. Each of them lives in a land where toasting is widely viewed as an expression of courtesy and good etiquette. In one scenario, the brother joins in the toast because he realizes that the reason for the toast is simply to celebrate a milestone that the company has reached. In the other scenario, the Christian declines to join in. He wonders, could my employer's words be considered nationalistic? The brother fears that his neutrality might be compromised. But the goal of both brothers is to please Jehovah by acting in harmony with his will. So you can see why I was a bit confused by the old picture here. It actually doesn't make a whole lot of sense, but now you see why they had to Photoshop, or maybe it was in there originally, the flag. Because there's a flag in the room and the boss is literally pointing to the flag and saying, Godspeed and yippee-ki-yay and yee-haw to our great company and our great country. And if he would have just said to our great company, you would have been like, hoorah! But because he added country, you're like, hoo-dah! Hey there, pal. I'm not saluting our flag or anything. Whereas if there's not a flag in the room, is the psychology here, is there a flag in the room or is there not a flag in the room? The nationalistic thing is so befuddling to me. I genuinely just don't get it. I try and go through like the situations, like what reason is someone going to have to make like a boss going to be making a speech and it turns hyper nationalistic, like America the Great and screw all those other people that we don't like, bomb them, who cares? Like, what? You guys are like probably some data company doing some IT work, huh? And it's just really, really baffling. But I have to wonder, how is this going to play out for Jehovah's Witnesses that are reading this and hearing it again? How is this going to go down? Because I think Watchtower has a problem where you have witnesses that have been around for a while, so they have the working memory of what Watchtower used to say about these. We'll just enter it into the old Thunderdome here real quick. This is from 2007, so roughly 20 or so years ago. There was a questions from readers. The Bible does not mention toasting, so why do Jehovah's Witnesses avoid sharing in toasts? You know, most people probably know this. I've talked about it on the channel. There's a bunch of videos about it, so we won't get too far into it. But the general gist of it is that it has a design or practice that is rooted in false religious customs, and there's no place for true worship. They do acknowledge even that there are wedding rings and other things that witnesses might do that they'd be okay with, but at the end of the day, I'll just read the last part here. True Christians do not interfere with such gestures, but they do not personally participate. Knowing when such a ceremony may occur, many witnesses have acted with discretion so as not to offend others. In any case, they are determined to not make patriotic gestures which are out of harmony with the Bible. Toasting today may not be viewed by many as a religious gesture. Still, there are valid reasons why Christians do not share in toasting, which has a religious background and even now can be viewed as asking heaven for a blessing, as if seeking aid from a superhuman force. And this is coming from the people who, at least when I was a Jehovah's Witness, pretend to pray before every single meal, going to, hey, the heavens must open up and may I have a blessing from some superhuman force. But you wouldn't want to do that with worldly people or something like that. But this was in 2007, so about 20 years later, there's a change. And this is actually this is something I've talked about before, but this is part of a pattern that Watchtower has, where roughly every 20 years or so, they kind of like to mix things up. And there's really a fascinating case of this because it's almost like on schedule where something doesn't matter. Hey, do whatever you want. Okay, 20 years later, okay, this is outlawed. And then 20 years later again, okay, whatever your conscience allows, we'll just do that. This is questions from readers from the September 15th, 1951 Watchtower. And it's asking, what should the Christian's position regarding work and defense plants, serving on juries, selling Christmas cards or trees, etc.? And they go down and say, hey, we're mostly preaching the good gospel of Jesus Christ, and we ain't got time for all of that. They even say to draw up rules for all possible situations relative to secular work would embark us upon the compilation of a voluminous, Talmud-like set of regulations, seeking to make all the fine distinctions as to when and when not certain work becomes objectionable. The Lord, God, Jehovah, has not laid that responsibility upon the society or organization. Different terminology. Same poop, different toilet. Well, actually, it's kind of the same poop, the same toilet, just a different butt. It is each individual's responsibility to decide his own case. And then they give the example of selling Christmas cards. When does it become too far? Well, you're not selling Christmas cards, but what about selling turkeys at a grocery store? What about sweaters that are going to be used as a Christmas gift? We can't really go and comment on all of this. And then it says, the society's silence on these matters is not to be viewed as giving consent, nor is it to be viewed as a condemnation. We do not wish to openly express. It means that we think it is the individual's responsibility to choose, not ours. It is his conscience that must be at ease for his course, not ours. He knows all of the circumstances, not we. Jehovah's Witnesses have read their Bibles and studied the Watchtower publications that have endeavored to make plain the righteous principles and requirements of Jehovah for the guidance of each Christian. Each one should now be able to determine for himself that he can conscientiously do in the way of secular work. It does specifically mention jury duty. As for jury duty, would you be acceptable for this service, say, in a divorce case where one might be granted on grounds other than adultery? Your Christian conscience might eliminate you, rendering you unacceptable to one or both sides of the case. So back in 1951, Watchtower essentially took the approach of this would be too difficult to come out with all of these different regulations. This is kind of what Jesus showed up for. It's like the Jews had so many rules, and there was just an endless amount of man-made rules and regulations and procedures, and it was like they even call it Talmud-like. So they weren't going to do that because God hadn't commissioned them to do that. But interestingly, 20 years later, I guess God changed his mind. Pretty surprising for an unchanging God. But 20 years later, we get the refreshed patch notes, the upgrade that everyone had been waiting for, in the form of another questions from readers, March 15th, 1973. What is the attitude of Jehovah's Witnesses toward jury duty? As far as they are personally concerned, Jehovah's Witnesses generally do not feel that they should sit as judges of other people when confronted with an opportunity to handle a legal dispute. Their exemplar, the Lord Jesus, turned it down. So they give you a biblical reason why Jehovah's Witnesses do not sit on juries. It's not possible. We don't do it. We maybe had said something about it in the past, but don't even worry about that. And then at the end, they make it explicitly clear. Exemptions, however, are not granted everywhere. If a person cannot be exempted when called for jury duty, even after explaining matters to the judge, he can, nevertheless, state his conscientious scruples regarding a case when questioned by the lawyers before the trial begins. If his conscientious scruples are not, it's a good band name, accepted as disqualifying him for jury duty, the Christian may feel that he will have to refuse to serve in order to not violate his conscience. In that case, he should prepare himself to face whatever consequences may arise as a result of his decision. So, Get the original one. It's a questions from readers. This is something that the Watchtower organization is receiving questions from Jehovah's Witnesses about. 1951, they're writing a letter. Okay, what do I do about jury duty? When you first get called when you're 20. And now that you're 40 and you're writing another letter like, well, what do you think about jury duty? Well, now you can't do it. So one time you wrote a letter, they said, hey, it's up to you. You have to figure that out. That's between you and God. Now you've written another letter when you're 40 and all of a sudden, nope. Whatever crime, whatever pun, if you got to do jail time, you got to do jail time. If you got to pay fines, you got to pay fines, but you cannot do jury duty. Well, it's okay, because by the time you're 60, God's going to change his mind once again. In 1997, there's another questions from readers. What should a Christian do when called for jury duty? In some lands, the judicial system uses juries selected from the citizenry. Where this prevails, a Christian must decide how to respond when directed to report for jury duty. Many Christians have in good conscience concluded that Bible principles do not rule out appearing. And at the very end of the article, it says, if a Christian reported for jury duty as directed by the government, but because of his personal conscience declined to serve on a particular case, despite the insistence of the judge, the Christian should be prepared to face the consequences, be that a fine or imprisonment. So they sort of say what they said in the 1973 questions from readers, but they really change a couple of the words there to make sure that people know that it's not because Watchtower told them to, it's because they decided to for themselves. Sounds like maybe a legal struggle might have been going on there, but hey, I ain't no legal expert. But they do add in an additional paragraph in the final analysis. Each Christian faced with jury duty must determine what course to follow, based on his understanding of the Bible and his own conscience. Some Christians have reported for jury duty and have served on certain juries. Others have felt compelled to decline, even in the face of punishment. Each Christian has to decide for himself what he will do, and others should not criticize his decision. So when you zoom out of the organization, you start to see it as a generational thing. You have a certain group that's leading, taking charge, and they're coming up with rules and ways of interpreting the Bible. And then about 20 years passes, and you'll have some of those ones that were making those decisions who are very old will have died, and new ones will come along, and it changes. Then the cycle repeats itself again. And there's a lot of instances throughout Watchtower's history where this happens. And I think that this does like a psychological trick on Jehovah's Witnesses' minds. I think the video maybe I'm most proud of, it's at least the most well thought out video that I've ever made. It's called Why No One Wants to Be a Jehovah's Witness Anymore. And I basically try and make the case for when you've seen generations of Jehovah's Witnesses all believe in the exact same thing and it fails. Like, I knew that my grandparents had grown up in this, and then they got old. Then they were like on the cusp of death, and they were just waiting for Armageddon. And so then I look at my parents. They were also born into it, and now they're starting to get older. I'm like, wait, two sheep right in front of me kept walking on the path, even though the path was off of a cliff. And there's sheep behind me, there's sheep all around me, and everyone's just going forward. And you feel like, maybe I'll be the black sheep here because I don't want to end up at the bottom of the cliff. I think when you can see it happen in your own life, or you get to that age where you've seen, a lot of people will leave when they're 18 or, when they can finally leave home. And a lot of that has to do with the restrictive rules and, the common reasons Jehovah's Witnesses think that people leave the organization. You just want to sin. And, to a certain extent, that might be kind of sort of true. Not that we care about sin all that much, but you know what I'm saying. And then you have people that leave when they're older. And I think the ones that leave when they're older have experienced this phenomenon that I'm trying to elucidate. They have seen people live their entire lives waiting for the promises of Watchtower to come true. And it doesn't work. And they think, well, there was a misunderstanding. But then they see another generation following right behind them. And you think, okay, now you're gone at 80 and your kids are 60 and I'm 40. Is this just going to repeat itself? Am I going to be the 60-year-old that's looking at the 80-year-old like, oh God, what did I do? Am I going to be the 80-year-old that is like, oh man, what did I do? Why didn't I get out sooner? And I think human psychology just doesn't want that for us. We want to evolve. We want to grow. We want to thrive. We want to experience something new. And that's what makes the world a better place. We don't just keep making the same mistakes over and over again. And when we do, it's frustrating. When society makes the same mistakes over and over again, we have an immense sense of frustration. When we, on our own personal time, continue to make the same mistake, it is really frustrating. And I think when you pull back and look at the landscape of witnesses, I feel like them reading this is going to bring that to the forefront of their minds, because there's going to be people that were old enough to really be paying attention 20 years ago. And they'll remember that specific moment that they wrote the question. They were one of the readers asking the question. And the answer was, no, we don't do this thing. And now the answer has changed. And you look at who was leading the organization then, and now it's a different group of people. You get what I'm saying essentially here. But I think that there is like this generational memory. And it does damage. It does damage to continue on in doing the same Jehovah's Witness shuffle over and over again. As for the rest of this Watchtower magazine, not super interesting. That is why I've chosen to hit you guys with a story that you didn't think was related, but was related, because it's about the friends we make along the way. There's some stuff about elders. There's some stuff about making friends. I guess I could talk about a couple of different things, at least from this conscience article, just to wrap things up here. This one actually tickled me in paragraph 11. Solid food represents substantial or deeper truths that spiritually mature people can understand. Now, typically, this is like a prophecy or something that it requires like some actual human cognitive function to be happening in order to like get a handle on it. But listen to what they call spiritual food now. Solid spiritual food in 26. Such solid food includes Bible principles. I've never heard that from a Watchtower. I don't imagine. Like, yeah, we got to get these deeper truths like Bible principles, and it's like every Christian on planet Earth is applying these Bible principles just in different ways, and by the history of your organization, you guys do that as well. So what does that actually mean? Absolutely freaking nothing. 13 had me chuckling as well. The conscience is not an infallible guide. The conscience can be influenced by such things as false religious beliefs, prejudices, and wrong desires. And Watchtower knows this by their own history. The collective conscience of Jehovah's Witnesses, as dictated by the governing body, has changed, has shifted, even though God's standards never change. And why? Because those governing body members got it wrong. They were actually teaching false religious beliefs. It's amazing that they're like, oh man, the conscience, it could be influenced by false religious beliefs. Kind of like those other governing body members that you say they got stuff wrong, and that's basically false. So you are also affected by false religious beliefs, I take it. We would be remiss without including a bit about apostates here in paragraph 15. Our conscience can also be damaged by bad associations. People who are alienated from God have an insensitive heart and can pose a great danger to those who want to do what is right. Appropriately, the Bible urges us to avoid those who walk in the futility of the minds and who are in the darkness mentally. For that reason, we do well to turn away from them. I find this really curious because clearly someone who is alienated from God, someone who's not a Jehovah's Witness or an active Jehovah's Witness anymore, they're trying to be like, warning, warning, danger, danger, don't go near, right? And it says because they have an insensitive heart. I thought that was just such a weird expression until I remembered that Jehovah's Witnesses think about sensitivity as being sensitive or like really, really connected, tied in, like the detritus kind of suckling off of Watchtower's tits. That was a weird thing to say, but I said it, so I guess I'll just move forward. But they think of sensitivity as like, ooh, when when that tit twitches, I, feel it. They think of sensitivity as being sensitive or very quick to react to changes that Watchtower makes. And someone who's alienated from the organization has a broader perspective. They can speak about how the organization used to be back in the day. And so when they see a Jehovah's Witness who now has facial hair, oh, that person just has an insensitive heart. Yeah, from those people, you should turn away, because the person that has left and didn't know anything about Jehovah's Witnesses are now allowed to have a beard. Well, obviously their little insensitive heart's going to say, what the hell, dude? I remember when we couldn't do this back then. What's going on? What did someone tell you that you finally could so you could? And they just don't want Jehovah's Witnesses to deal with that. I think that this paragraph has very specifically been put in there for that reason. People who have left the organization are obviously going to be more critical of those various changes that they make. They're talking about a pretty significant change here of getting away from looking at false religious connections to things. No, we're not talking about birthdays or any of that. We spent so much time talking about birthdays. Yes, it'll get views, but phooey. Anyway, that's about all I have to say for this one. So with all of that, if you haven't liked. If you haven't hype. And stay safe. Be kind. And don't forget to spend more time loving the things you love than hating the things you hate. Now go out there and have a good ass day.